The content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you. What's good, folks? I'm GG, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. This is the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Now, before I get things started, like I always do, I want to give a shout out to the members of the Green Gorilla channel, all my gorillas. I want to give a shout out to I Am Black Man, John Reads Too Much, Hayetrix. I know that's not the way to pronounce that. I'm going to get that right one day. Leroy Honeycutt, True King 337, B Hillfire, Force Windu, Michael Cavinus, Urban Nomad, Raphael Brown, Barnolas, Kyle J. Sura, I'm Just Jules, The Book of Ronin, Ab Media 83, Damon Harris, Brian McMurray, Ethan Hines, Mr. Lumet, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Shop Talk Live, Ryan Jackson, The Face, Mr. Heat, David the Man, Afro Analyst, NEU, Ronan Martin, Black Wizard ADOS, Camp Low, Issa Abdul Sahir, Sir Anthony, Deshaun Nolly, MLR, Charles Rogers, Black Dog, Brother Love, Infamous Chillin', Universal 178, Black Swerve 404, Rashid Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, See Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, The Nameless Protagonist, Black Pill Ned Stark, Author Unknown, Odd Collar, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Brian Williams, Kalan Jakala, Sherrod Martin, Ricky Dawson, Cedric Bowman, True 7360, BK Born Shaheed, James Washington, Hostile Adept, Seven Coast Dojo, W. Pierre 1, Roguish the Billmonger, I Care, Lady Miss Thing Green, BGS Ibmore, and Marvin Battle Jr. Thank you all for your ongoing support to the channel and all of the help, the financial help that you provide to help make the channel what it is. So my hat's off to all of y'all. Word. And if you have the predilection and you're wondering about how you too can become a member of the Green Gorilla channel, well, here's how. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Today, I want to introduce you to my new membership program that consists of 5 levels where you can invest in the Green Gorilla channel on a monthly basis and receive level-specific perks. Memberships are special because they improve the quality of the content of the channel and will help me to be able to keep the channel going. Now, to participate in the Green Gorilla channel membership program, all you have to do is hit the join button, which is located right next to the subscribe button on my channel page. Now, for all of my subscribers who decide not to participate in my membership program, nothing will change. The content will keep coming the way it always has. Thanks for watching, and be careful out here, people. Bless. So, today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to shift the screen away from all of the noise and move again into the subject that I was talking about yesterday, but I'm going to pick up where I left off. Now, I know that this is not everyone's cup of tea. I'm getting into metaphysics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think it's important politically for black folks. But if it's not your cup of tea, I understand. but I want to get it out of the way, and I don't want to leave it festering and lingering. I want to get it all out of the way. So I'll have another part to this tomorrow, and I'll finish it up tomorrow and bring it all home. But today, we're going deep down into the rabbit hole. And I'm just going to jump right in. I'm not going to even give you room to breathe. I'm jumping right in, you know. So, at this time, it's very important to compare and contrast modern rationalism with naturalism. And I've talked to you about what rationalism and naturalism are. If you haven't watched the other two videos and you feel out of place, you don't know where your moorings are, I would suggest that you go back and check those out. Okay? But it's important to compare and contrast modern rationalism with naturalism, because these two perspectives reveal two radically different cosmological understandings. I mean, the way we think of the world and ourselves and the extent to which we believe we're connected to or disconnected from one another and the environment have a profound effect on our psychological, our social, and our political predispositions. So the Copernican revolution, and if you don't know who Copernicus is, I'd suggest that you look him up, but he was a monk who was commissioned by the Catholic Church in order to develop a more accurate calendar. And ultimately he came to the conclusion that we don't live in a geocentric universe, we live in a heliocentric universe. So the Copernican revolution, it marked a paradigm shift away from the Ptolemaic view of the cosmos. And Ptolemy of Alexandria was, I think, one of the three generals who, after Caesar was able to conquer, not Caesar, but Alexander the Great was able to conquer Egypt. He set up, three consulates, or, three rulers, and Ptolemy was one of them. But anyway, so the Ptolemaic view of the cosmos is the geocentric model of the universe. So just to let you know that, some background information on that. But so like the Copernican revolution marked a paradigm shift away from the Ptolemaic view of the cosmos, and this realization that we don't stand at the center of the universe, it had a profound impact on the self-image of Western men. What they thought to be true by nature of their perceptions was false. So you have these new understandings about gravity, which were developed by Isaac Newton, which keeps the planets in orbit, changed the way that Western men perceived the heavens and celestial phenomena. But I want to argue we're in the process of discovering even more information about the cosmos, and the natural and the social sciences are giving us even more innovative ways of thinking about what's in our self-interest and how to work through our moral, our social, and our political problems. Now, there are some people who are on, what I call the received view of modernity. And the proponents of this view, they're quick to highlight its positive attributes, right? They want to argue that numerous upheavals of the Enlightenment led to the substitution of reason for doctrine, agency for fatalism. Now, I don't know what you know about fatalism. I'm not talking about death wishes, but I'm talking about predetermination, or your fate being preordained. So substitution of reason for doctrine, agency for fatalism, independence for obedience, scientific method for superstition, and human ambition for divine predestination. And at the forefront of this change was a new physics and mathematics that made the world seem rational and linear and subject to human mastery. But the explanatory power of the new physics and mathematics became addictive, leading to what I would consider to be static and rigid conceptualizations of the nature of things, especially human nature. Now, what I just read was a quote from a book by Leo and Hanauer, as it pertains to the received view. So these are the positive aspects, so-called, of the Enlightenment and of modernity, right? But what's often left out is colonialism, slavery, and a whole host of other atrocities that the West enacted on people from other cultures. But I don't want to get too far off the beaten path. But you think you would add that in too. But they always gloss over their sins and highlight what they perceive to be virtues. But at any rate, so there's no question though. I mean, mathematics, logic, and rationality are powerful tools, and they enable men, or they enabled Western men. And let's just face it, we're Western men also. Even though we like to claim that we're different, or that we have a different orientation towards the world. I mean, for the most part, we are. Let me turn this music down just a little bit. We are Western men. We think just like Western men. And we don't quite realize how we got to the point where we are because we don't study, their metaphysics, and we don't study their politics, and we don't study their epistemology as, scrutinizingly as we should. But again, I digress. So the power of mathematics, logic, and rationality was basically employed by these people in order to establish a uniform view of man. And they ascribe to man unchanging qualities and motivations. So what qualities and motivations? Well, they declared that man was rational, and that he was egoistic. And you get political and economic theories that are undergirded by these, and I use an air quotes here, facts. But I want to suggest a new way of thinking is emerging and is pushing us towards a different worldview. And I want to suggest that it's reaching critical mass to a certain extent, but the inertia of modernity, it is powerful, and people don't want to let it go. But I think that at some point we're moving ineluctably towards a different worldview. And I think that within the context of Western culture, because I think that some people from other cultures, even in ancient times, thought differently about this. But I'm talking about now, and I'm talking about Western culture. Just keep that in mind. So this counter movement, I think, begins with a group of philosophers called the American pragmatists, whose narratives in the areas of epistemology, which is the study of how you know things, and ontology, which is the study of being. So these narratives in the areas of epistemology and ontology have begun to change, or should at least change, our cosmological perspective. Now, an added feature of American pragmatism is that its naturalistic outlook allows for the incorporation of what I call humanistic values and concerns, in distinction from the one-dimensional reductionist and egoistic values hashed out by modern liberal philosophers. So what I want to do is illustrate how this is the first step in Western culture to remembering or putting back together what rationalism and reductionism have torn apart. And it begins with radical empiricism. Now, what I want to show is that radical empiricism that unfolds from naturalism is a quarter turn, if not a 180-degree turn, back to a point of view in which the cosmos is perceived as organic rather than as mechanistic, in which human beings are regarded as part of rather than distinct from the cosmos, in which human beings are seen as interrelated and symbiotically dependent upon other cosmic beings rather than independent and isolated from them, in which spirit, you can call it mind, nous, geist, whatever you want to call it, in which spirit and matter are perceived as being united inextricably rather than perceived as separate and distinct substances, and in which all things are understood to be joined together in like a single unifying mystical force rather than as a whole bunch of different individual things existing on their own accord. And I want to add, though, that as far as I'm concerned, radical empiricism in this way is more similar or more congruent with an African point of view, especially classical African culture, than is modern, metaphysics. So anyway, let's just get right into what radical empiricism is. Now, this is going to be heady, man, and I can't hold your hand through it, but I'm going to give it to you, So the best starting point to explain the main tenets of naturalism, I think, is its rejection of modernity's representational account of experience. And in particular, it begins by explaining John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant's epistemology and why their accounts of experience and knowledge are inadequate. So, for the most part, the representational account of experience just basically says that you got subjects that apprehend a series of unconnected and unrelated successions of discrete sensory data. And it confirms that the subjects, and you are a subject, the I, right? So it confirms that the subject's senses capture such discrete data, sensory data, that then triggers events in their nervous systems, where they are in turn converted into mental representations or impressions for those subjects. So the idea here is that you are a subject and there's unconnected and unrelated things happening outside of you, and that you see it, which then triggers events in your nervous system, which then orders those events so that they make sense to you somehow, right? So that's the representational account of experience, right? And within the scope of this model, sensory data is said to be discrete because each sense datum or object is regarded as self-contained and incongruent with other similarly self-contained sensory data. So everything is a monad, an atom, and it exists on its own accord, right? It can be related to some degree, but actually it's not. Everything is out here for its damn self, if I had to put it in some ghetto terms, right? So things exist by themselves, isolated and apart from other things. And the mind performs this unifying project that it really shouldn't do, but it does by dint of habit and just the way we're wired, right? We're hardwired. But furthermore, each subject's experience is individually unique. So every person that perceives these data, right? Each experience of these individuals is unique and incongruent with other subjects' experiences. And this presents problems for intersubjectivity. So, how do I know that when you see red, it's the same thing that I identify as red? Or if I hear the note C, that you're hearing the same note? Or if I smell shit, that you're smelling the same shit? Now I'm getting ghetto again, but you catch my drift. So the idea is that there's no way to measure what your experiences are with another person's experiences related to this representational account of experience. But of primary importance for now is not just the epistemological implications, but the ontological implications. And basically, that's that all apparent causal relationships that exist between sensory data are illusory and are merely the product of the mind's laws of association. So there's nothing really going on out there right? Causally, that is ordered, but our minds order the experiences that we have. So I just don't agree with it. Okay, so anyway, Kant has a similar notion because he's one of these people who has a representational account of experience, and he says that the transcendental ego is that thing that synthesizes all of these experiences together. Now, naturalist philosophers basically reject this account of experience because it just doesn't square up with what we actually perceive. Now, in the naturalist view, ordinary experience informs us that sensory data are interrelated and interconnected in ways that the representational model models of experience deny. And also, representational accounts of experience have not only implicit ontological implications, but also political implications. And I'm going to make this case later. I can't make it right now, but I will make it later. That both modern epistemology and ontology have given rise to misguided, counterfactual social contract theories, which assume that men are separated not only from government, but from each other, and also from nature. But I don't want to get too far on a tangent. But naturalists, and one of these people I'm going to be talking about heavily is John Dewey. Okay, he's the creator of the Dewey Decimal System. He's also an American pragmatist. But I think that what he has to say about metaphysics, ontology, and epistemology is more accurate than what the men from modernity had to say about it. And I think that, you know, John Dewey's account matches up more nicely with what we know now from contemporary neuroscience, developmental psychology, behavioral psychology, and the like. So I'll get into that a little bit later on as well, but not tonight, but I will get into it. But again, without being too tangential, naturalists like Dewey argued that modern epistemology and ontology are based on inaccurate views of experience. So what naturalists claim is that the rationalist view of the world is rooted in like this hyper intellectual and critical mode of analysis and investigation. It actually abstracts away from things as they are. And so what they call for is what is typically called radical empiricism, but it's an inversion of modern epistemology, right? And it unveils a profoundly different ontology and investigative inquiry into experience. It calls for nothing less than a radical empiricism. Now, for the sake of brevity and to just be simple, I argue that there are three theoretical implications embedded within radical empiricism. And I think they explode the framework, the ontological framework of modernity. One is the displacement of the idea or the model of bounded objects with the paradigm of processual existent events. So that's number one. Number two, the replacement of the ideal of self-contained substances with the theory of event concrescence. Three, the rejection of formal and final causality by means of a theory of emergence or imminent self-creation. Now, I know that's a lot. You don't understand what that is, but I'm going to explain it in detail within the next 40 minutes, probably less. Okay? And if you don't understand it, you really don't know where I'm coming from. I might talk a lot of shit. You might hear me yell and curse and scream, and that's cool and fun. But you won't understand like where I'm going politically or why I make the kind of assessments that I do without understanding this. But so my argument is that this radical empiricism is more consistent with what we currently know about the world than the outdated cosmological models that undergird modernity. And quite frankly, I mean, our politics is based upon the metaphysics and the ontology of modernity. with the rights rhetoric. Our economics and the models of economics that we use are predicated upon the idea that, human beings are rational calculators. We always do what's in our self-interest. I'm just making the case. This is not, they have human metaphysics wrong. They are wrong about our nature, is what I'm trying to argue. And if they're wrong about what our nature is, they're going to be wrong about the kind of political institutions that are going to best match up with us and improve the quality of our lives related to those institutions. So we need to reboot. We need to upgrade our institutions to, come more into a better fit with who we actually are as persons. But unfortunately, you got this indelible stamp formed from the philosophy of modernity, and it lingers. It just limits our politics. It limits it when it comes to economics. It limits it related to religion and gender and even race. And my thing is, if black leaders and black social critics would implement this new way of thinking into their critiques of contemporary Western culture, instead of trying to salvage the project of modernity or applies flawed principles to black life, they would actually begin to develop new understandings of black people's most deep-seated problems. They would then be able to create more autonomous and virtuous communities and consider more practical methods for minimizing black domination and oppression. In short, I argue that they would actually begin to practice what I call a neo-soul politics. But anyway, let me get into this. So I got to talk to you about radical empiricism, but I'm going to do so by means of something called process cosmology. Okay? Now, let's talk about bounded objects. So I'm going to say they're not real, bounded objects. But that doesn't seem to be true, right? I mean, to say that bounded objects are not real, it just seems very odd. For example, like if I'm looking at a bird carry a worm to its nest, right? As I am giving this stream, it just seems to outline an entire series of bounded things. I mean, I can distinguish the bird from the worm and the nest from the tree. Therefore, doesn't ordinary experience inform me that these things are actually separated from one another as distinct and separate substances? So a naturalist would say no. Western philosophy has a preoccupation with atomism and drawing hard and fast distinctions and delimitations between impermeable things, right? And these highlighting these things in these ways are abstractions away from the processual fields in which these things actually exist. But again, how is it possible to illustrate that these various things are processual existence events and not discrete substances? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the secret lies in the vast temporal and indeterminate field of flux in which all of these things or events emerge. For naturalists, particularly John Dewey, processual existence events are characterized by field event categories of organic wholeness, continuity, and interdependence with other existent events that make up the whole continuum of experience, the aesthetic continuum. So in this sense, it would be difficult for a person who's orientated towards atomism to be able to see the forest for the trees, because the forest is the trees and the trees are the forest. In a like manner, the bird, the worm, the tree, and the nest that I might be perceiving when I look out of my window are all event moments that make up a contiguous interconnected field or a contiguous ecosystem. Now you can remove one seemingly insignificant but a vital constituent part of an ecosystem, and it has the potential to create a negative cascading effect on the whole. So there are no discrete and gateless objects, but various levels of overlapping and integrated fields of events. Now, it should be commonplace. So the bird might be taking the worm to its nest, but the nest couldn't be made without means of the tree. And the bird couldn't sustain its energy without it consuming the worm. So that's an event, a contiguous, interrelated event, not necessarily something that's happening discretely, but we're trained to see it that way. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there are no gateless objects, but various levels of overlapping and integrated fields of events. And this radical ontology has implications for the way we order our moral judgments and the way we think about others in relations to ourselves. Okay? The politics I like, or what I call for, neo-soul politics, acknowledges that neoliberal accounts of morality and success are simplistic abstractions of what really occurs in the moral and the social world. Beyond that, a neo-soul politics, which is the kind of politics I advocate for, seeks to understand individual behavior and values in the context of complex and interdependent social systems. So, and I'm using white philosophy right now to explain this because, you know, I worked in the academy, and working in the academy, you got to use language white people can understand, right? So I interpolated some John Dewey in to make my case. And so ultimately, he wrote a essay called A Naturalist Theory of Sense Perception, right? And in it, he hashes out the importance of this processual connection between events, interactions, and fields. And this is what he says in that essay. He says, whenever there is an event, there is an interaction. And an interaction entails the concept of a field. And then he goes on to say, no field can be precisely delimited. It extends wherever the energies involved in the interaction operate, and as far as any redistributions of energy are effected. The field can be limited practically, as can all matters of degree, but it can't be existentially located with literal exactness. And that's abstract, right? But to flesh the point out, he says, look at the following example. Let's say, for example, there's an earthquake. Now, the most, intense disturbance in an earthquake may be located, right? And you might be able to use a seismograph apparatus to, locate it specifically to a certain point, right? And the boundaries of what you can sense can be mapped out. But these boundaries are set practically by the capacity for us to record and detect the changes. But they're not absolute in any existential sense. I mean, think about it. One could say that the existentially understood field of the earthquake is the entire universe, since the redistribution of energies extends indefinitely. Now that's theory. Like, how do you know exactly where the point of the earthquake began and where it ended? That energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's just redistributed. And who's to say where it stops and where it begins? We can't do that with any degree of certainty. So there's a field that does this, and it's imprecise. It's not exact. There's going to be ambiguity, uncertainty. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So the important lesson to get here is that bounded things are really abstractions. I mean, ontologically, things are continuous and interdependent parts of larger and more comprehensive events that take place throughout overlapping and interactive processual fields. But this is not what the modern ontological outlook does. The modern ontological outlook conceptualizes. It abridges, slices, analyzes, separates, compartmentalizes, and reduces things to discrete objects. Now it's funny, like on the graphic that I have for this this stream, I got a picture of Alsar cut into pieces. And of course, his brother Set is the one that cut him into various pieces, right? Out of jealousy and envy of him. But the point is that I'm just trying to get my thoughts right so I can express this the way I really want to express it. So Outset is going through lamentations because she is feeling genuine sorrow at Alsar being separated in this way, and works to put his body back together and give birth to Heru. But if you look at the Tree of Life meditation system of the Memphite theology, you'll find that there are various faculties that the gods have, right? And the faculty that abridges, that slices, that analyzes, and that conceptualizes things as individual things is Sebet, right? The faculty of verbal thinking, naming, describing, ordering, and syllogistic logic. But then you have Het Heru, which is number 7 on the Tree of Life scale of the gods, who is the imaginative faculty, right? Who harmonizes and who uses creative imagery to bring things together. So then you also have Heru, right? And Heru is the willpower, right? But then you have Ma'at and Herikuti, and you got Tahuti and Sekert, but I don't want to get into those. But I mean, the idea here is that you got an imaginative faculty, or your right brain, and then you have an analytical faculty, which is your left brain. What I want to argue is that Western culture is too preoccupied with the left brain. It just is. And it creates all kind of disharmony and social strife. And that's pretty much the case that I'm making, right? Or one of the things that I want to point out. And that things aren't really bounded the way that the analytical mind likes to bound them. Things are much more fluid than what they appear to be. Okay? So naturalistic ontology highlights connections and basically illustrates the interdependent relationships that exist between objects. So whereas modernity breaks things apart, naturalism remembers them. And here's where the political implications of naturalism begin to take shape. So emphasis can't be placed on any individual person, institution, or social practice, but instead on how each of these factors interacting with one another produces either positive or negative consequences for large numbers of persons. And the second implication of radical empiricism reinforces the first, but in addition to it, it basically says events are not isolated, but display organic proclivity to converge with other events to form interrelated and interdependent wholes. So, according to Dewey, situations are what give rise to such wholes. So, it's really convoluted, but I'm gonna read a quote from a philosopher named Gregory Eisenberg, and he explains it better than I could. So I'm just gonna read it. So, the wholes situations realized or organically composed and mediated by the functional parts of events and their interactions. Situations organize events into manifolds of felt, transactional, reciprocal interconnections, and do so always within large and more inclusive contextual wholes. Yet whether one is speaking of events or situations, their dynamically constituted forms are the same. They are histories with beginnings, careers, and endings. They grow in temporal breadth and depth, exhibiting developmental structures, formatively oriented and nisus towards a contextually generated telos, which is in the end. But not a fixed and final end, but one synthesized from interactions with other wholes. A fact exemplifying their inextricable mixture of the precarious and the stable. Although they are open to other wholes, each event and situation possesses a qualitative tone that individuates it apart from the others. Most importantly, they are field events distinguished by undivided continuity, wholeness, and interfusion between a foreground and background field. Now, that's a lot to take in. I know. It is. But it's really not. I mean, in hip hop, we say this shit all the time, especially early hip hop. I mean, the idea is, and I'm just putting it into crass terms as much as I can. Do hip hop, but do it your way. Merge with us and engage in the art form, but give voice to a different kind of expression in it. Don't copy or mimic somebody else's, because there is no preset end to this. But you have to use it and develop it on your own terms and give voice to it in your own creative way. So it's about convergence, coming together. So this idea of convergence is grounded actually in Leibniz's organicism. Now, I'm getting deep on it right now. Okay, if you want to understand it, you might have to go back, see what I'm alluding to. You know, on the playback, if you so desire. I told you we was going down a rabbit hole tonight. Sorry, but I got to get this out. So this idea of convergence is grounded in Leibnizian organicism, from which Dewey adopts a kind of panpsychism. Now, I don't know if you know what panpsychism means, but I had a conversation with BGS on the stream yesterday, and you know, there's some philosophers who have this idea, even from ancient times, that mind exists out there in the universe. And it just doesn't apply to human beings, but minds are everywhere, in everything. So that's what panpsychism means mind everywhere. And tying it back, so this idea of convergence is grounded in like Leibnizian organicism, whereby even inanimate objects, such as atoms and molecules, exhibit biases to unite or disassociate with other atoms and molecules. And he uses evidence from the natural world to explain this. He says, look, plants and non-human animals act as if they are concerned that their activity, their characteristic receptivity and response should maintain itself. Even atoms and molecules show a selective bias in the indifferences, affinities, and repulsions when exposed to other events. With respect to some things, they are hungry to the point of greediness. In the presence of others, they are sluggish and cold. So even atoms behave differently in different events. And we now know that even our observations have the ability and the capacity to alter the movements of subatomic particles. But I don't even want to get into that right now. That's going too deep down the rabbit hole. But so this panpsychic interpretation of Dewey seems to place Dewey into some sort of crankish kind of way of thinking, where, you know, like the ideas of love and strife, right, kind of anthropomorphizes or gives human qualities to the universe. But I'm gonna tell you, modern thinkers do not want to anthropomorphize anything. They like to perceive the world as a machine, like a clock, instead of like a living organism. And I want to kind of push back against that. But anyway, so if you want to say that like Dewey is crankish, I don't want to restrict it to panpsychism as much as I want to say, look, interdependence and interrelatedness that emerges from our experience of the material and social world as a dynamic, phenomenal, and interactive thing or phenomena. That's how I would like to proceed. Okay? And if a theory of panpsychism is something that's not attractive to you, for the purpose of describing the way in which matter acts or interacts, it should not be automatically dismissed as absurd because, there are several reputable scholars. One person, if you want to learn more about panpsychism, David Chalmers is really like a famous dude. Look up David Chalmers. He's got videos on YouTube. Another cat, his name is Greg Rosenberg, and another cat is named William Seeger. They all do work on panpsychism, and they each argue for the plausibility of the idea that nous or Geist or spirit or mind is not just something in the province of human beings, and it's not just something that exists inside of our heads, that is out there, and we can kind of like a radio transmitter can tune into it or out of it, and that like even moods and feelings don't necessarily just exist within inside of us in a bounded way. Black people know this shit, man. We talk about vibes all the time. Like, you can go into a room and be like, man, the vibe in that room, man, it ain't, I don't dig the vibe here. You might even walk into a club and you'll look at the people and they'll look at you and you'll see something about it and you'll get a vibe from it like, this ain't my spot. Let me dip. Just so moods don't necessarily just exist within inside of you. They might exist outside of you, and you might not be able to pick up on that frequency or that rave. You might not be able to ride that wave. But there are people doing the work in the philosophy of mind who consider panpsychism to be viable and a logical means of explaining the presence of consciousness in the world and how consciousness may affect the mobility, the arrangement, and the interaction of matter. Not just us, but matter. Okay? So anyway, the first implication, I think, of radical empiricism is that the world is not comprised of delimited objects that exist apart from other objects in space and time, but that these objects are actually instances of dispersed and interspersed processes that commingle in event fields. And what Leibniz asserts and what many process philosophers borrow from him is the idea that the interdependence and interrelatedness of all existence events illustrate that each contains connections that express all the others, and in consequence a perpetual living mirror of the universe. Therefore, the immediate entailment of the rejection of simple location and supersession by a coextensive theory of the location of all existent events is a microcosmic, macrocosmic world order. And then you're starting to get into the Hermetic principles then. As above, so below. As in the macro, the micro, and as in the micro, the macro. Ultimately, the main thrust of the second element of radical empiricism is that it is possible, impossible actually, for things to merely be things with their own slice of existence, apportioned to them in discrete moments of time. Instead, all things participate in a cosmic unity with all other things, and that unity is reflected in and permeates every ephemeral and transitory part of that discrete thing. So what does modernity do? Modernity would have us perceive objects as windowless, gateless, little atoms, or monads. A monad is like a mono. You look at the prefix of the word monad, you get mono, which means one. One thing, like a sphere, or imagine a pinball, has no windows in it. You can't get inside of it. So modernity was have us look at and see objects as windowless monads that repel and clash, and that strike and impede one another, like say for example, balls on a billiard table, on a pool table. and that I think that naturalism would have us perceive objects as parts of fields that are intimately connected with all other fields. I mean, ultimately, things exist in and through felt, and I'm talking about affect, feeling, felt association, not in and for cold isolation. And the political implications here, I think, are profound. Naturalism rejects the idea of political association for the sake of mere self-interest, as modern liberalism does, but regards man's association as something that is ordinary, as all the other things in nature. I mean, in other words, men often display a tendency to converge with other men. Thus, cooperation and trust are crucial components of man's nature, not just naked egoism. What can I get out of it? Right? That's not how human beings behave. Although they do behave that way, I'm not saying they don't. But that's not the essence of human relationships. What can I get at? Well, now, if you start fucking people over, then there's a reason for people to resist against that, right? But the natural position is not one of like, what can I get out of it? I'm only doing something just for myself. And if you encounter a person like that, it's probably because they've been deeply and profoundly impacted by modern thinking. So, and not everyone from every culture thinks this way. Different people from different cultures think radically different than we do. But anyway, so I think that intersubjectivity, not just me, what can I get from me, but intersubjectivity is essential to politics and morality, because human beings exist in association with other human beings. And neither politics nor morality makes sense outside of the context of social connection and relation. And beyond that, meaning and activity can only be mediated through association. Otherwise, the subject, you, would have no knowledge of the world. And even if you did have such knowledge, if you were not able to interact with or relate to the world, you would cease to be able to develop your capacities and powers in any substantive way. In other words, what I'm saying is the subject has to have points of connection. You could call it intersection, and I'm not talking about intersectionality, but you have to have points of connection with other subjects and other existences for nurturance, growth, and development. You can't grow outside of the context of social relations. It's impossible. You can't even exist without interconnection with your environment. It's impossible. I tell you what, if you think you can, put a motherfucking plastic bag over your head and see how long you exist by yourself, isolated in your own environment. See how long that'll last. You can't. So anyway, moving on to the third and the final implication of radical empiricism is this emphasis on imminent or emergent self-creation out of particularity. And I kind of alluded to this with hip-hop, but the ideal can be more easily understood by means of explaining it with other ontological theories to which it can be, seen as the exact opposite. So you got Plato's theory of the forms and Aristotle's concept of formal and final causality. Now, I don't know if you've ever read Plato, but he's a dope ass philosopher. I think you should read it. I don't agree with it. But I mean, at least I know it. Okay. So on the one hand, you got Platonic ontology, Platonic understanding of the way the nature of reality is. And he basically says that what is real can be separated from our ordinary experience in such a way that reality is immaterial. What's real is not matter at all. Instead, what's actually real is unchanging form. That's what's real. The things in this world are less real than the things in the formal realm. But we do this with religion all the time. And I try to explain to students when they study this stuff, like you already have the tools to completely understand Platonism, especially if you were raised in the Christian faith. Because, I mean, the idea is, okay, this world is the lower room and you're waiting to get to the upper room, right? So your spirit is what's real. Your body is something that's transitory and something that, can be done away with. But the essence of who you are is eternal and unchanging, right? So this invariable mind or form, which is separate and distinct from matter, and which is even superior to matter, instructs and informs the patterns of material bodies. That is, perfect mind, perfect form, effects and effects particular imperfect bodies from above, regulating their qualities and circumscribing the content of their manifestations. So form merges with matter, is superior to matter, and determines what kind of shape it's going to have, what type of qualities it's going to take on. Now, on the other hand, so naturalism is not like this, okay? And Aristotle is another person who's more naturalistic than is Plato, right? So he says, Aristotle does, that in his ontology basically subjects material substances to a preset end. Right? So an acorn is growing into an oak tree. A human being is growing into a rational animal. Because everything has an end, a final cause, a telos towards which it's directed. And the path for which it, is supposed to be able to accomplish this task, to become what it's supposed to be, is set, is predetermined. So Aristotelian ontology, although it is, again, more naturalistic than Platonism, subjects material substances to a preset end, which precludes imminent or emergent creativity and diversity. Thus, material incarnations are bound by formal and final causality in a way that precludes originality or unfolding innovation and evolution. Now, Dewey rejects both of these models and insists that in the context of coextensive and interdependent processual event fields, unique circumstances and environments continuously give rise to novel incarnations with unique qualities. And so I'm gonna give a quote from Dewey in a book he wrote called Experience in Nature. And he says, "The genuine implications of natural things may be brought out by considering beginnings instead of endings. To insist that nature is an affair of beginning is to assert that there is no one single and all at once beginning of everything. It is but another way of saying that nature is an affair of affairs, wherein each one, no matter how linked up it may be with others, has its own quality." So under this framework, the forms of things in the world, they emerge out of the unique and indeterminate context in which they begin, and not out of ontologically superior forms to which they are bound. So in this sense, nature is free to produce novelty out of its own endless dynamic processes of interrelation and evolutionary growth. I mean, if I had to put it differently, form emerges out of the dynamic and creative processes of nature, not out of something that lies beyond or behind nature. So let me put this back to modernity and tie it together and compare and contrast. Modernity calls for us to define objects conceptually and to pigeonhole them into pre-established categories. Naturalism understands that objects arise out of precarious and unique situations that prevent them from being classified in any rigid and predetermined way. So nature doesn't know boundaries the way we know them. Instead, novelty, adaptability, innovation are inherent in all of its processes, mostly all of its processes. So, as in the previous section, I want to point out the political implications of naturalism in regard to radical empiricism related to this concept. So the idea of imminent and unfolding creation provides a conceptual base for the rejection of political and moral dogmatism. As human beings are members of social or of a social and physical world that's constantly changing and evolving, it should be expected that the norms, the institutions, and the social practices that people utilize to improve their lives should be constantly open to criticism and renewal. So ultimately what I want to say is a neo-soul politics, which is the kind of politics I'm calling for, asserts that the best that blacks in America can aim for is a provisional form of politics and ethics that's undergirded by pragmatism, which itself must be undergirded by a form of consequentialism that aims for provisional growth and excellence. We can never arrive at a universal and precise ethics because of the dynamic nature of reality. We can never fully determine the exact extent to which we are to blame the subject or the object of an event because both features of our existence are responsible for our successes and failures, excellences and inadequacies. And what I say is, practical reason here has to be the guide, the only guide. We must examine the context in which actions are made and thoughts that give birth to actions. Only in this way can we begin to gain some provisional understanding or some ad hoc account of why a given subject is thinking what he or she is thinking or doing what he or she is doing, and whether it should or not be praised or blamed. We must look both above and below and perform the work of a demiurge if we are to make the best kinds of moral assessments and evaluations of black subjects and objects. Informal punishments and formal laws, private convictions and social rituals. But the error lies in overemphasizing either the subjective or objective features of existence. Such overemphasis stems from abstraction and reification. So I know that's a lot. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back and answer any questions you might have if you got any questions about what it is that I just said. Again, I'm not expecting a lot of people to stick here because this is not about sensationalism or yelling or cursing or raising a fuss. I'm trying to get you to understand what I think metaphysically to then understand what I think politically. I don't think like a modern Western person. And I think a lot of black people think exactly like a modern Western person. And I don't think we can make any progress that way. So I'm gonna take a quick break and I'm gonna come back. And if you got any questions, I'll field them and answer to the best of my ability. But if not, I'm breaking wide. And I'm gonna listen to Doc Johnson tonight. So let me take a quick little brizzy, and I'll be right busy. All right, I'm back, and I see nobody's actually wanting to ask any questions. So anyway, man, that's just what I think. And at some point, I want to begin to be able to tie it back to politics, and I'll do that tomorrow, and it'll make more sense tomorrow. This is really abstract, and so it's Dr. Johnson hitting me up right now. But ultimately, man, what I'm trying to say is, if I had to put this in the most dense, simplistic terms that I could even possibly put it, man, modernity is wrong, man. White guys in Western culture during the era of enlightenment had a certain idea about the way that human beings actually are, and they're not accurate. They're not accurate at all. They're not even close. They present us as being rational calculators, but we're not rational calculators. We're emotional reciprocators. And I would encourage you, if you want to understand what I'm thinking about this, man, go back and listen to it again. And if it doesn't make any sense to you, listen to it again. And then if you got any questions, ask me. If you got any questions, put it in the comment section. If I can, I'll get to it and try to answer those questions. Or even on another stream, if you say, hey, Gigi, what were you talking about? Right? But ultimately, all I'm trying to say is even matter, like atoms, exist in connection with each other. And the events that take place circumscribe the ends of their actions. And that the way man is can't be defined neatly and tidily. We live in an organic universe in which we're interconnected with every damn thing in it. And we have to understand our politics in that way. But I don't see black people acting that way. I see a bunch of people dedicated to their own advancement and to their own evolution within the confines of the system, which is all predicated upon liberalism. I'm rational, I'm egoistic, I'm rational to the extent that I can use my logical concatenation to achieve my ends and goals efficiently as possible. That's just not how we are. People are not even that way right now. even though they claim themselves to be that way. So, I'm just trying to put my little 50 cent in it. Well, my 2 cents in it, actually. So, I mean, to put it in Arsaurian terms, look. You have things that appear to be individual things, isolated, separated, not connected at all to the totality of the one. Like I wrote a rap a long time ago about this shit. And it went something like this. And I'm not going to rap it. I'm just going to speak it like a spoken word. I said, I conversate with Set as the sun sets in the west and brush blunt ash from my flesh. A witness to Socrates' danger fatal liquor. A teenager when the universe began to flicker and give birth to the one. Just as the moon was born from the earth and the earth from the sun. The true deviser of the riddle of the Sphinx, when I confused Confucius, I watched his eyes blink and think of the black horse in the apocalypse that's prophesied to murderize the metropolis. I play with concepts of Plato like kids play with Play-Doh while bass heads beam up off yayo. You're too low to understand my metaphysical stilo, too large to comprehend the intricacies of my micro. I might blow up with the force of a supernova, or roll over imbeciles like a Range Rover. But I'm here to shape and mold those who hold the insight to fight and gaze into the blinding light and catch a minute glimpse of a particle of infinity and come within the vicinity where the empirical realm merges with imagination and discover divination. The whole idea, and I wrote that shit like damn 30 years ago. The idea is that you're interconnected to everything in the cosmos. No doubt about it. But you can't see that. Because you don't want to see it. Because the culture that you live in doesn't teach you to see that. It teaches you that you're at odds with nature. That you're at odds with your fellow man. That you're at odds. Like they got women doing this shit now. They believe that they're at odds with their own fathers and their own sons and brothers. And then we, as a knee-jerk reaction, we get at odds with them. I mean, it's you know, like this shit, they got us fucked up in this culture, man. And they got the knowledge, man. Like they already have the knowledge. These people aren't dumb. They have universities where they study this shit. They've been studying this shit for a long time. Now, some of them have gone off and veered off the beaten path, but like they got a whole bunch of people studying this shit at the university level, man. They don't teach it to undergraduates because the undergraduates aren't studious enough, erudite enough to get into, you know, deeper, understandings of what it is that they're reading. They just do the shit to get a grade. But every now and then you get somebody who's actually interested in this kind of stuff and they'll have conversations with you. And I know a lot of black men in the manosphere are deep into, esoteric knowledge and knowledge about metaphysics and epistemology and morality and politics, economics, the whole nine. And I think this place is really like a fertile ground for philosophy amongst black men. You ain't going to get it in the academy. It does not exist there. At least it exists here. So, anyway, man, having said all that, bro, or sisters, whatever, if y'all out there, we're interconnected. We're linked, inextricably linked. Even though we don't want to believe we are linked. Now, if you want to start tripping, I gotta, if you start doing some ignorant shit, I gotta let you feel it. I might have to shut you down for a minute, but at some point, man, like we're all, even if we are involved in war with each other, we're still interconnected in war. It's always something drawing us to each other, even if it's anger and enmity and strife and confusion. So anyway, man, thank y'all for joining me tonight, man. I ain't expect for a lot of people to feed into this, but I just want to get it out of the way. And tomorrow, all I'm going to do is talk about how it connects to politics, and I'm going to be done with it. So when you hear me ranting and raving and cursing motherfuckers out, you'll understand why. You'll get why. All right? So I don't have all the answers. This is just my viewpoint. I think it's more congruent with the African point of view, with the ancient and more esoteric teachings. That's what I think. But, hey, go ahead and believe what these white folks from modernity tell you. I don't believe it. So, anyway, man, I'm out this joint. I'll holler at y'all, man. I'm going to go ahead and key in Doc J's stream, man, a little bit later. So, I'll holler at y'all, man. One.
Yeah. I'm a phenomenon, I shine like Orion. I came in a rap gang to smack it up like Heron, transform it like Megatron. Wait, like Yamatron, most rappers are some peons. I'ma starve them like Ramadan, I'm troublesome. You don't really want no troublesome, cause I pop guns like hood tick, do bubble gum. I been dumb, gon' stay that way till kingdom come. When the sun I'm at, unleash a demon, a polygon. I'm heavy, son, got more knowledge than Farrakhan, more gain than Cap. Karma that bishop named Don Juan, stay lit off some Shandan. Maybe Bacardi Ram, stay drink to some Nordstrom. Call me that Dapper Don, more violent than Genghis Khan. The members of Taliban, niggas faker than silicon. Get hit like a .com, like soldiers in Lebanon. I'm bringing that red rum. When I get through with you, son, you gon' think of C-Rap. I carry weight like a heavyweight. Bake more cakes than patty cake. Watch the fiend salivate. You a lightweight, bantamweight. Better contemplate. If you violate, make you levitate to the pearly gate. I conversate from the show me state where these niggas love to hate and hot murder rate. What a waste, but this flow is just a taste of God's grace. Shining this light in the ugly place in the prophecy. Got more wisdom than Socrates' philosophies. You don't really want no parts of me, can't you see? I'm slicker than Mephistopheles, stronger than Hercules, more dangerous than the Damocles. The MCs trying me pretty please. I wet up they white tees, knock them out they wallabies. Now they touch my deliries. For coming up short of the little C's when I break out the killer bees. I study music like Ocasio, hit chicks look like Ashanti. When I'm breaking them off, they yell at odd poppy. You rack rappers is sloppy, you can't stop me with that. We can sorry, copy, malarkey. I'm a monster like Frankenstein, rock harder than Palestine. You slams, dropping dimes, a snake and serpentine. Can't stand to see me glow like Nas with his big shine. All you haters cold in it, cold sores need calamine. But my hot shit like red bricks hitting your head. Leave the sour taste up in your mouth like lemon heads, like Simply Red. Wasted some years up in the feds when I touched down. Already red, that gave me head. I got higher vision for higher living. I'm highly driven. I'm acting women like it's some sort of sick religion. Driving an Impala, sitting on it each 20 inches, and they spinning just like the planets in the solar system.
Black country people, over in Africa, down to America. Black country people, we make all the world go round and around, yes. Black country people, up in Canada, down to Jamaica. Black country people, we make all the world go round and around.